Okay, welcome everyone to Sunday Mornings at the Marxist Library, a weekly program of the Institute for the Critical Study of Society. In pre-pandemic times, we were based in Oakland, California at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library. During the pandemic and likely afterwards, we meet digitally on Zoom, but we still solicit donations in support of the work of the Marxist Library. In fact, we may need a new name for our program because we're wishing you all a good morning, and it's good morning at the Marxist Library, but it's actually good afternoon and even good evening because we have participants from all over the world, throughout the United States and all over the world. My name is Alan Miller, and I will be hosting this meeting. I'm a member of the program committee that organizes Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library. I'd like to start off by saying that we always welcome input, feedback, suggestions for topics and speakers. You can contact us through our website at ICSSmarx.org. A quick note, this session is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube, along with a link to it from our website at ICSSmarx.org. You can also find links to our past programs on our website. For over a decade and a half, Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library programs have presented a diverse platform for presentations on topics such as political economy, capitalism, socialism, communism, imperialism, militarism, war. Sunday mornings is a comradely forum for political discourse and debate. The opinions expressed are those of the participants. They do not necessarily represent the ICSS or the Marxist Library. But one thing we are all united on is our respect for the work of Karl Marx and the belief that his work remains relevant today. Our motto, which is taken from Karl Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach, is, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." Very excited today to present our speaker, coming to us from Moscow. And mind you, that is not Moscow, Idaho. That's Moscow in the Russian Federation. Don Corder is a correspondent for RT America. Some of you may have seen his reports on RT, and he is doing a documentary film, I believe, on the Donbass, what's going on in Ukraine, and also has done a lot of work on current events in the Russian Federation. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it over to Don for his presentation. And if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, maybe give a little bit of background. I think people would be very interested to hear where you came from, how you ended up from East Brunswick, New Jersey in Moscow, Russia. So go ahead and take it.
Yeah, sure. Well, first I want to say thanks for the invitation, everyone. It's cool to see that this Marxist library has so many active members, and that you comrades are all doing this every week. I'm definitely going to come back for future ones as a spectator. So yeah, for my presentation today, I wanted to talk about I'll talk a little bit about a background of how I became a Marxist-Leninist, how I ended up in Russia, why'd I come to Russia, what I've done here so far, and I'm also going to talk a bit about some big topics connected to Russia right now, like the recent elections that took place in September. I'm going to talk about, like Alan mentioned, Donbass. I am doing a documentary film about what's going on there with Jeff Monson. He's an international heavyweight fighter and also a communist. And I'm also going to talk about Navalny as well, if we have some time. And then, of course, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have, not necessarily just about politics, but, about Russia, also about what, simple things about my life here and everything. I'd also be more than happy to answer. So a little bit about myself. I got into socialism and Marxism, Leninism at a pretty young age, to be honest, around when I was 13 years old. And that was when a combination of things were happening. the 2008 crisis happened, which for me in my life was like the first experience of capitalist crisis my first personal experience of capitalist crisis in my entire life, and it also happened to be the worst recession since the Great Depression. And I saw what was going on as a result around me, where I grew up. My parents came under economic hardships. Luckily, not as bad as some as what was the case with some other people who I grew up with. But I noticed the times were hard. I was 13. I was forming my political opinions. I also remember that I started forming left-wing opinions, and a lot of people that I was having discussions with that didn't agree with me, they were like, "Well, what are you, a communist or something? You think everyone should have free healthcare?" And I guess their idea was that they were trying to scare me, but in reality, what happened was I thought, well, maybe I am a communist, and I started reading about Marxism, about Leninism, and also it was at the same time, just by coincidence, that we were learning about the Soviet Union and socialism in school. And I remember I was fascinated by this subject just because the Soviet Union was so different from the country that I lived in. And so I was reading all about it on the internet, and I just remember that I cross-analyzed a lot of what my teachers were saying and with stuff I was reading about on the internet, and I realized that a lot of what the teachers were saying was not true. And that was the first time in my life where I really started thinking, wow, okay, like authority figures aren't always right, actually. So that's how I started getting into Marxism, Leninism. I read Marx, and for the ideas of class struggle and the way our society is built made a lot of sense to me, especially because my dad was my dad's now a pensioner, but he worked as an auto mechanic. My mom worked in school. There were working class people that worked every day to survive, to get by. And so me observing them as a child, combined with reading about Marxism, Leninism, really put everything into perspective. So by the time I went to university, I was already, at least I knew the basics of Marxism, Leninism, and I started an organization called the All Marxist Leninists Union at Rutgers University that's actually still around. And we did a lot of work there. We participated in rejecting Condoleezza Rice as a speaker at our university through direct action, and those were cool times. And I wrote my senior thesis about the fall of the USSR and something called the Nina Andreeva affair, which actually you can still find on. I published it on Peace, Land, and Bread. It's like a communist intellectual scholarly journal. So you can find it there if you guys are interested in reading it, guys and gals. So basically, when I finished university, I was thinking like, what do I want to do with my life? And based on what interests I've developed and my passion for Marxism and Leninism, and my desire to make the world a better place. And I also studied Russian in university, and in university, this idea was developing that, I understood that the information that's available to us is really, published by people whose ideas are formed by the society they live in. And basically, all of the information, or at least the vast majority of the information we have about the USSR that's in English, was, published in English for a reason. And I thought the only way I'm really going to understand like both perspectives of the Cold War that I didn't see for my own eyes was to learn Russian. And I wanted to read Russian sources. I wanted to like read directly what like the USSR was writing about and saying about their own policies against the propaganda that I grew up with. This one-sided notion that the USSR was just a dictatorship, forced collectivization was terrible and failed. Everything was bad about the USSR. I didn't believe that. So I decided I was going to go to Russia right after university. I got a job as an English teacher, and I was just going to improve my Russian as much as possible, and along the way, educate myself, and read these sources in Russian and interact with people in Russian as much as possible to understand what Russians really think about their own Soviet history. Not the Russians that defected to the United States, the ones that lived there and supported the USSR. So just 3 months after I finished working as an English teacher, after I started, I realized I wasn't actually a very good teacher and I didn't like it very much. So even though I of course respect the profession very much, but it's just not for me, teaching. So I eventually started looking for more work, and coincidentally, RT was hiring. And I always watched RT when I was in university because, at the time of the events of 2014 in Ukraine, the bombing of Libya, the Iraq War, RT was always like making, anti-imperialist reports, from the perspective of the people that the United States was, terrorizing. And so I was like, well, that's great. That's cool. I can go into journalism, which is basically just history right now, and work as a journalist at Russia Today, and I can also pursue my goal of better understanding the Russian perspective of the USSR. So since then, my Russian has dramatically improved. I speak it fluently now. I don't have any problems except for like maybe, super big words that aren't used all the time. I've made a lot of contacts within the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. And actually, I'm in the process of writing a book right now that's going to be a compilation of interviews with people from the USSR and people who are communists today in Russia, and to show the West their stories and their perspectives. And I'm going to translate it all into English so that the West can see what actually people who really lived under socialism thought about it. Because we have the misconception in the West, at least, this is like a propaganda point of the right, that, people who lived in the USSR didn't like it, or people who lived under communism in general, like, hated communism. And, when you talk to someone on the right wing, they're like, oh, well, why don't you go live in a communist country if you like it so much? Oh, you won't, because, everyone hates it there. But that's not the case. And the amount of people who defected from the USSR, at least, was a tiny fraction of the population. If you talk to most people who actually lived in the USSR, who are in Russia right now, they're pro-communist. Maybe they're not like ideologically, they don't understand Marx and Lenin on a deep level or anything, but they think about their past in the USSR and they're like, well, I lived a good life, and it's a shame we lost it, and that's the majority opinion among older people who actually lived in the USSR. What's interesting is that the more anti-communist opinions are prevalent among people who didn't live in it, the younger people, which is interesting. It's like the reverse of what we see in the United States, where younger people are taking up more socialist ideas than the older generation in general. So other things I've done, I've also talked to, and there's a North Korean solidarity organization in Russia that if you've seen my videos on my channel, the Revolution Report, we've done a North Korea mini series. And the first episode, we did an interview with the head of the DPRK Friendship Association that's based in Moscow. And they even said that that I was the first American ever to step foot in that building. And this gives me a unique opportunity to being in Moscow to do things like this. If I was in the United States, I would have never been able to do that. And these people. There's a huge diaspora actually of Koreans in Russia, and the majority of them are actually pro-communist. They're diaspora not because they fled North Korea, but because during the time of the USSR, a lot of them came to study or work in the USSR because all of these countries obviously were, friendly countries, and they regularly exchanged intellectuals and workers, and people could go on vacation between these places. And a lot of people ended up staying in the USSR because they got married or had kids or something. And so there's a big diaspora of Koreans in the USSR, or in current Russia, that are pro DPRK, and they've got a lot of interesting things to contribute. I've also got an interview, and actually I can show you part of these. Part of this video, actually. I'll share my screen right now so you all can see it. Okay, so we're gonna go here. Oh, sorry, not this one. The same defectors who. So this is the actual, to give you an idea of what this Korean Friendship Organization was like. I could show you this part of the video where I went in and then did the interview with the guy. Directly with Pyongyang, and goes to events in the DPRK, and we're actually going to have the unique opportunity for me to be the first American to set foot in here. So let's take a look and see what they've got. So this guy actually knows or knew Kim Jong-il personally. Actually, he was at his birth. He was even invited to his birthday. He also, can go to the DPRK without minders, because he's he doesn't have Korean citizenship, but he's like part of the diaspora. So. He's part of an official organization, and they're like, you're basically one of us. So Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il at Mount Paektu. It's a really important mountain in Korean folklore, Korean history, and it's right now located in the northern half of the country. A really important spot for the Korean people. Over here, there's you can see two pictures. These are actually pilots from the Soviet military with Kim Il-sung here, who are actually veterans of the Korean War. And this is another picture here, as the professor told me, of people from the Korean diaspora. Yeah, so and then I did a big interview with this guy who's the head of the organization. But yeah, an interesting thing I also learned is that actually the Soviet Air Force directly participated in the Korean War, obviously on the side of the North. So that was something interesting I learned. I was also able to talk with Maxim Suraikin, who is the head of the Communists of Russia Party. They're the second largest communist party in Russia. They're the biggest party is the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, and that's the second largest party in the country. I have interviews lined up with them as well. It's just I've been really busy with this Donbass project, but I'm going to be getting them soon. Maxim Suraikin is the general secretary of Communists of Russia Party. So they also run in the elections. And I also did an interview just recently that's going to come out soon with Sajiu Malatova, who was a woman who, I don't know, probably some of you know if you've studied perestroika and the end of the USSR. But Sajiu Malatova was a member of the Supreme Soviet who, at one of the last congresses that the Communist Party held, she gave a speech denouncing perestroika, denouncing Gorbachev, saying that she took the stage and she was like, this man is ruining our country, and we're gonna lose everything we worked for over the past 7 decades if we don't take him out of power and do something quick. And I have a video also to show you for like just a couple seconds to give you an idea of what that was like. So this was her at the Supreme Soviet. Yeah, anyway, it doesn't have English subtitles, but basically what she's saying is calling for the resignation of Gorbachev, and they tried to cut her off. And like she said, even that a bunch of people in the audience were like crying because they agreed with what she said, but they didn't actually have the courage to stick up for her, or like join in her call for the resignation actually. So that was interesting. Um, so that's what I wanted to talk about for recent stuff that I've accomplished so far in Russia, having this unique position, because I think uh, this kind of stuff is what I wanted to accomplish by coming here and learning Russian, because I think there's a real lack of information, like pro-socialist information about the USSR and Eastern European communist world in English. And it's a real shame. And like nobody's really come over here and translated. I mean, there are some exceptions, of course. There's like Marxist.org. They've got a lot of good translations, but they're mostly from Progress publishers. And there's a lot of new stuff that can be explored that I'd like to use my YouTube channel to continue to show people in the West by translating it from Russian into English. So, I'm going to continue now on to the recent elections in Russia, because I wanted to give you all a sort of understanding of what the contemporary situation is in Russia, the contemporary political situation. And to do that, we got to talk about the recent elections. And these elections, these were the legislative elections of September of this year. And like I said before, the KPRF, or the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, is the second largest party in Russia. The first is United Russia, and that's the party of Putin. Then there's the KPRF. Then there's the there's a liberal democratic party, but it's not liberal nor democratic. It's actually very right wing and like kind of borderline fascist. And then there's also another party called Fair Russia. So these are the main parties in Russia. And in these elections, the KPRF actually made record gains. They gained 19% of the parliamentary vote. That's up from the last legislative elections in 2016, in which they gained 13%. With the LDPR coming next at 7.5 and Fair Russia coming at 7.4. Fair Russia is like a social democratic party. So the KPRF, first I want to talk about them a little bit before I go into the elections. The KPRF is the inheritor of the legacy of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which was made illegal after the fall of the USSR. So they reinvented themselves as the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. And they believe in Marxism, Leninism and everything, but their official party line is they're of the idea that right now the main arena that they should be in is the parliamentary struggle, because they're kind of in, like, I would say, in terms of anti-imperialism, a loose alliance with Vladimir Putin's government, because they both are against Western imperialism, and there's NATO bases, NATO countries all around the border of Russia, and so on this, the KPRF and United Russia see eye to eye. But on the other hand, the KPRF is against a lot of the internal things that United Russia does. And to combat this, they mainly take they mainly struggle in the parliamentary arena. A couple things that have really been hot topics in Russia over the past several years are pension reform, because Putin said at the beginning of his presidency that like the pensioner age will never rise under his administration, and he raised it several years ago. And that created a massive outcry and opposition that was actually led by the KPRF. Another thing, but the last thing, the most recent issue that the KPRF has been able to rally people around has to do with this election. Actually, it has to do with the electronic voting system that they used for the first time in these legislative elections in Russia. And the KPRF says that because of that, basically United Russia stole the election because of this electronic voting system. And I'm going to get to that in just a little while when I go further into the elections. But first, I'm going to talk about the fact that the Russian government claims that there was actually foreign interference in the elections in Russia from the United States, actually. And this is actually connected to Navalny, who I'm also going to talk about, because there was basically the Russian Foreign Ministry said that the Russian government had a colossal amount of unreleased evidence that the U.S. had begun attempting to interfere in the upcoming elections, and they said that over 20 foreign NGOs openly called on social media giants like Facebook, Twitter, and Google to not comply with the Russian authorities that were demanding that these social media companies remove certain banned content. And the banned content they were talking about was Navalny making propaganda around this thing called smart voting resources, which were promoted by Navalny and his anti-corruption foundation, which is now considered an extremist organization in Russia. And this smart voting system was basically the technology has ties to the Pentagon. The Pentagon actually engineered the technology that was used in this smart voting system, which is why the Russian Foreign Ministry and the Russian government were saying, like, these social media platforms have to, take down any posts promoting it, because promoting banned technology. Eventually, Google and Apple ended up following the rules, and Navalny called them accomplices to the Kremlin, which is ridiculous. But this is an interesting thing to note, that there was some sort of attempt at foreign interference in the elections. But like I said before, the overall sweeping victory was for United Russia, but the Communist Party made serious gains that they haven't seen since the 1990s, specifically in what Gennady Zyuganov, who's the general secretary of the Communist Party, has called Deep Russia. These are like the regions of Russia that are not around Moscow or St. Petersburg, but places in Siberia, places that are often overlooked by the main, canvassers for the main United Russia Party. Two examples I can give you of these are the Nenets Autonomous District and Yakutia, which is in Russia's far east. So these two places became strongholds of KPRF support in this election. And I wanted to explain to you guys what the KPRF's program was, actually, because it is interesting, and it's important to know what they were running on this time around. So their program was called 10 Steps to People's Power. The first step was called Property to the People, a Sovereign Economy to Russia. The KPRF promises to end what it calls elements of the country's colonial dependence. It's specifically talking about the financial system's linkage to the dollar, which makes the country to a certain degree reliant on foreign capital. A lot of people talk about how, when Putin came to power, Russia was no longer reliant on foreign capital like it was under Yeltsin. And to a certain extent, that's true, but not 100%. And the ruble has significantly devaluated since Russia became, Russia, not the USSR. I mean, just like 15 years ago, the ruble was like 30 rubles to a dollar. Now it's like 75, and inflation is pretty runaway here right now as well. Russia's no exception when it comes to other places like Europe and the United States, where places are seeing, record levels of inflation. But the situation, of course, has improved in terms of dollar dependence, because right now Russia only has 20% of its reserves in dollars. The rest is in gold and other currencies. The second part of their program is industrialization for the 21st century. The KPRF is calling for heavy industrial investment and import substitution to further remedy the damage that was created by the 1990s privatization of the industrial sector. The third one is food security. The KPRF wants to return the system of farming to a system of collectives, because a third of the country's arable land is actually overgrown with weeds. Because it's important to note that collective farming isn't actually something that only has to be in a socialist economy. Actually, collectives, in collectives, it wasn't owned by the state. The farmers who worked on the collective farms owned the equipment themselves, and their salaries depended on the output of the actual collective farm. And this can exist. This is basically a cooperative. A state farm is different. That also existed, but the KPRF is calling for a return to collective farming. Number 4 on their program is finance as an instrument of development. They want to prohibit the registration of Russian legal entities in foreign countries, so that foreign companies can't basically dodge taxes. They want to limit the amount of foreign capital on Russian soil. That's self-explanatory. That makes the country more independent. And they want to nationalize wholesale trade enterprises. The next part is called Honest Taxes, a Fair Life. They want to massively reform Russia's tax system. The next one is called Curb Tariffs and Prices. They want to put price controls on utility payments so that no utility payments will exceed 10% of anyone's salary. I think this is really important. The next one is called Power in the Hands of the People. They want to bring discussions of the country's biggest problems to the workplace and to use the TV as a forum for nationwide discussion of political issues. And the next one is called Man is in the Center of Government Policy. They are calling for 1/3 of the entire government budget to go to education, healthcare, science, and culture. The 9th point is a strong Russia, a safe country. They want to strengthen the military against NATO. I don't know if you all know, but the Russian military is considerably weaker than it was in the USSR. I mean, it's not weak, but it's weaker because now it's just the Russian military as opposed to a multinational, multi-republic combination of countries. And the last one is called To a Great People, a Great Culture, greater support for cultural institutions like museums and theaters. So that's their program, the program of the KPRF. And actually, I was talking with a lot of my friends and comrades in the West when these elections were taking place. And a lot of people told me that in the media, they were kind of supporting the Communist Party, the West. They were kind of saying like, that Putin's cracking down on like the opposition and blah, blah, blah. But at this point, the opposition was only the Communist Party because Navalny's organization was actually branded an extremist organization that can't operate in Russia. And actually Navalny's supporters have a lot, most of them have just defected to different NATO countries in Eastern Europe at this point. So why were a lot of people saying that? Because actually Alexei Navalny, who's in prison still and was in prison at the time, was actually calling for people to support the Communist Party just by virtue of the fact that the Communist Party at that point was the biggest opposition force in the country. And it is now. Now that Navalny is gone, there's basically no other opposition other than the Communist Party. And I also think that the reason the West was kind of low-key supporting the Communist Party here is because I think they see Zyuganov as weak. And since he's been in power for so long, and the party's been playing the parliamentary game for a while and getting not that much done, I think the West is counting on. When they think about when they view Zyuganov as weak, the main thing they think of is the fact that in 1996 the KPRF won the election by all measures, but Zyuganov didn't do anything about it. He basically had the election stolen by Yeltsin. And a lot of people see Zyuganov as weak in Russia and in the West because of that. But so I think the West is just kind of banking on the fact that if Zyuganov comes to power, he'll be weak. But that's just my conclusion about that. But the last thing I want to talk about the elections, with regard to the elections, is back to the point I was making before about this electronic voting system. The KPRF didn't recognize the results of the election. Yes, the KPRF got, some of the biggest support it's seen since the 1990s, but the KPRF says, I mean, they called for an investigation into the new electronic voting system that from the beginning they were opposing. They were like, this is going to open the door to fraud, basically. Zyuganov claims it helped rig the election in favor of United Russia. He said he's been the leadership of the KPRF has been saying this openly. And actually, I have here one fishy moment that the Communist Party has been pointing to: Moscow's District 196. Communist politicians in several areas were leading, up until the last moment, and then they ended up losing by a huge margin. And one example is Valery Rashkin, who was one of the main people in the KPRF. He was running in Moscow's District 196, and he was leading by 1.35% when there was only 0.4% of the vote left to count. But he ended up losing by 13.87% at the end of the counting. So, this is something that the KPRF said was a clear rigging of the election, that it wasn't possible. And what's also interesting to note is that now this same guy, Valery Rashkin, is basically, being attacked in the media here in Russia. He's being the media is kind of like attacking his personality because he was arrested for hunting without a license. And so like the media is making a huge deal about that. And this is the same guy who was like running in this election, saying that the United Russia was stealing the election. So that's interesting to note. But the chairwoman of Russia's Central Election Committee said that there were also 12 cases of ballot stuffing that were confirmed. But an investigation was conducted, and they said that the committee said that there were no irregularities. So, that's what happened. The Communist Party of the Russian Federation stands by what it said, that the election was not fair, and they've come to blows with the government at several moments, because they've been they organized a lot of protests that did not receive official registration, which is illegal. That's basically what Navalny did when he was organizing his protests, and some of the party members and lawyers were arrested and stuff. So one of the outcomes of these elections is definitely that the relationship between the KPRF and United Russia has become a bit soured. That's definitely the case. So that's basically all I wanted to talk about with regard to the election. I'll talk about Navalny a little bit now and then go on to Donbass, because I think with everything I've just spoke about with regard to the election, Navalny came up a lot, and it's important to give you all some background on him, because of course he came into the eye of the media, specifically in the West. Actually, he's not actually that. I mean, he was never that big of a figure in Russia. Actually, he never got over projections of over 2% of the vote. But he was very loud, and he was supported by the West. And so, of course, we all know that he came into the eye of the Western media when he was allegedly poisoned, by Novichok on the plane when he was going to Siberia. He ended up going to Germany for for treatment. And I mean, the whole thing I was following the entire time. It's a really interesting story because, Navalny swears that he was poisoned, even though there's actually no evidence. There was no evidence found of any actual poisoning. And the Russian hospital that he went to first said there was no evidence of poisoning. And Navalny called them liars and said he wants to go to Germany for treatment. The Russian government said okay and let him go. And then he went to Germany, and even the doctors who did tests on him said that, he could have been poisoned, but we don't have any evidence. It's like very, very typical, story. But anyway, Navalny, this, conveniently enough, actually, this whole situation of him going to Germany worked really, it worked really positively in his favor, actually, but just by coincidence. He just shortly before he came back to Russia, he released like a super well-researched video, like hour long, about, accusing Putin of complete corruption and excesses in the budget and having a huge palace and everything, something that would have, a video that obviously would have taken like at least a year of work, and he released it right before he went back to Russia, which was just only several months after this alleged poisoning. Like all these things coincidentally went together, and he came back to Russia not when he was better, but specifically when he would have overstayed his bail, which would have landed him in jail, because he was actually on a suspended sentence for embezzling money. This happened several years before, and he did this to basically make a big statement and make himself out to be a victim. The Western media supported him, and he was able to cause a bunch of stir with these protests he was organizing around the winter of, I think it was last year, and when COVID was in full swing. But I mean, the main thing we got to know about him is that he was actually, well, first of all, before 2013, if I'm correct. Just a second, I'm gonna find this. I have it here. Yeah, so before, like around 2010, around 2010 or 2011 is when he went from being this ultra nationalist, like completely unpopular guy, to being a populist anti-Putin guy. His propaganda completely changed. I can actually show you some of his. There's a video that Navalny did back in like the early 2000s, where he called Muslims from Chechnya cockroaches, and this kind of stuff, you'll never find in his rhetoric anymore. And I'll get to why. I'll get to why in a second. This thing is in Russian, but I'm still good. You're still going to get the point, because there's videos. One second. It's a really old video. I might not be able to find it. I forgot to look it up before the beginning of the presentation. But anyway, everyone in Russia knows that he did this video, and they're not really fooled by by his rhetoric and everything. But what changed his rhetoric and the way he was organizing was actually a trip to Yale. He actually got a full ride to study at a Yale exchange program that basically trains people to start color revolutions in other countries. It's called the Yale University's World Fellows Program in 2010. It's a 15-week biannual program that markets itself as a seminar for like foreign future leaders. And all of the expenses are paid for by the US government, which is roughly $30,000 a student. And I can give you, I have a list here of other people who attended this program right alongside Navalny just in this year. Like this, this is just the people who studied alongside him. There's Fares Mabrouk, who was the founder of the pro-West think tank in Tunisia, the Arab Policy Institute, and he was a participant in the 2011 color revolution to overthrow the government. Another person is Diana Tsui. She's the head of global philanthropy for the Asian Pacific region at JP Morgan. There's another guy who was a former Mujahideen resistance fighter in Afghanistan, who's like now some sort of philanthropist. And there's another guy who was actually he didn't actually finish with Navalny in 2010, but he did the program in 2015. I just want to mention him because he was an activist in the Ukrainian Orange Revolution of 2004 and 2005. So this is typical United States government training someone for a color revolution. That's what they want. That's what they want Navalny to be. That's what the Western governments want Navalny to be. But people in Russia really don't trust him, and he never really was that popular, to be honest. I mean, he was popular on social media, and when he was able to call these protests, they were enormous. But I was of the impression that the majority of people that were going to protests, they were rallied on like TikTok and Instagram, and they didn't even really know like what they were there for, a lot of other people, but there were a lot of people there who were just frustrated with the current situation with the current status of things in the country, and didn't really know what else to do about it. So that was also another thing, but that's Navalny basically. And of course, I'll take any questions at the end. I got one more thing I want to talk about for the presentation, and that's Donbass. So basically, the first time I ever went to Donbass was when I was in university. It was 2017, and at that point, for years, I had been seeing, especially in 2014, 2015. I had been seeing on the internet and on the television what was going on over there. I was already a communist, and I was like, wow, these people, they declared independent people's republics, and all these communists are fighting over there to defend it, and all these people from the West who are communists are going to join up with them. And the leader of Donetsk People's Republics is saying like the goal of our republic is to restore the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And so I was like immediately fascinated by this, especially because I was looking for these people who look back fondly upon the USSR, the memory of the USSR. And there's tons of people like that now that I now understand that because I've seen it with my own eyes. But back then I was just like, wow. These people formed entire people's republics, like names that resembled what like the socialist countries of the Eastern Bloc. And in 2017, I got the opportunity to go there for what's called the International Anti-Fascist Conference. And this was a conference organized by the Federation of Trade Unions in the Lugansk People's Republic. And one telling thing about Lugansk is that basically the Federation of Trade Unions in the country is one of the most powerful organizations of the People's Republic. Like organized labor, those are the people who hold power in the Lugansk People's Republic. And so they organized this anti-fascist conference. I saw with my own eyes that this republic is basically, they're trying to bring back the practices of socialism in the USSR. They just don't have a communist party. They're run by a sort of popular front, a sort of anti-imperialist popular front. Like there are also people there who like strangely enough, say they're like right wing, people who self-describe themselves as monarchists. There's a lot of people with, there's also people with weird ideologies over there, but what everyone has in common is that they look fondly upon their Soviet past, and they're against fascism and they're against imperialism. And those are amazing principles to hold, in my opinion. And I saw that. I was in shock the first time I went in 2017, and I went back in 2018 and 2019 to see more of Donbass. And I even, started. I wanted to organize them, but unfortunately, the pandemic began and the border restrictions were put in place. So we haven't had one since 2019. But during my time there, I made a lot of friends with the workers of the People's Republics, with ordinary people there. I met all different types of people, and it was just not at all what they were talking about in the Western media. Like the Ukrainian narrative of what's going on over there, they say the area is occupied by the Russian military. There is no Russian military occupation there. Like there's literally no Russian military occupation. The People's Republics there are defending themselves. And maybe you could, I don't know, maybe there are some sort of Russian contractors secretly serving in the military of the People's Republics. I don't know, but to me, I mean, that just means that they're helping these republics defend themselves, but it's not a military occupation. Military occupation is a military, patrolling the streets, controlling the area against the will of the people there. And that is not what's going on. And they also said that the people who were natives to Lugansk and Donetsk, they say they're terrorists, they're thugs, they're drug dealers, drug addicts, bums. This is the rhetoric that they use, and it just is not the case. Like these People's Republics are run by like dignified people who want to oppose fascism and declared independence because they don't want to be under this fascist government. And they're organized. They have their own military. They have their own government structure, and they're not going to be pushed around by these Ukrainian fascists and ultranationalists. And so, that this really made me impassioned about this subject and made me angry that we were so clearly being lied to, and also about the fact that there's an information blockade around these People's Republics. It's so hard to get information from that side of the line because they're not recognized by any Western countries, and they're considered terrorists by Ukraine, which is an ally of the United States and the European Union. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the current situation there, because this conflict has been going on for 8 years now, and it hasn't ended. Most people who have read at least a bit about the Donbass conflict know about the Minsk protocols, right? But there have actually been 29 different ceasefires since the beginning of this conflict, and none of them have held up very well. The last one was in July of 2020, and the ceasefire is being violated day by day. And I can tell you for a fact that it's the Ukrainian military doing the vast majority of this, and of course it's war, like in war is a very unfortunate thing, and civilians are obviously dying on both sides. Military personnel are dying on both sides, but the overwhelming majority of civilians dying in this conflict, even now, the overwhelming majority is on the side of Donbass. And the reason for that is because the Ukrainian military is indiscriminately firing artillery bombardments where people are living, not even military positions. What I witnessed when I was in Donbass was a war of attrition, and I mean, I'm no expert in international law or like the laws of war, but it seems a bit genocidal when a military is, calculatingly, indiscriminately, purposely firing upon civilian populations, that have nothing to do with the military. it's what I see what I see is a war of attrition. The Ukrainians basically want Donbass to surrender by making their lives as unlivable and as terrorized as possible. Because these people, I spoke to them, and there's going to be tons of really heart-wrenching stories in this documentary of people, ordinary people that I spoke to, live at the front line. They talk about how every day they live under artillery bombardment. They're launching artillery shells every day. When we were in Donbass last time, in Donetsk, when we were in Donbass, is two places, Lugansk and Donetsk. They're two regions. When we were in Donetsk, every day we were there, we heard artillery bombardment because we were close to the front. And when we were in Lugansk, we were a bit farther away from the front most of the time. But we have basically a Telegram channel that's run by the Lugansk People's Republic, where they publish all of the violations of the ceasefire that the Ukrainians commit every single day, very specifically what they are. And the Ukrainians were violating them almost every day. And I'll give you, I recorded some examples here for you all. We got there on November 17th and we left on November 21st. So on November 17th alone, at 6 a.m. in a village called Chervony Liman, there were 3 artillery shellings. This is a village, not a military position. Okay, and this is artillery. It's not like mortar, or little bombs. Artillery. Artillery shells are enormous. They create enormous damage, and they send shrapnel in all directions. There was at 8:40 in the morning in Kalinovo, Barshevatoye, 18 artillery shellings. At 2:30 in the daytime, Pervomaisk, another village, 18 artillery shellings as well. And there were 3 other instances of multiple artillery and mortar shellings just on that day. And a bunch of infrastructure was destroyed, but there were no casualties. On the 19th, there was just one instance of breaching the ceasefire at 11:30 in a village called Dolgaya, when there were 4 mortar shellings. And on that day, actually, a 47-year-old woman was injured and the roof of a building was destroyed. And this is just like single days, and this conflict has been going on for a long time, and people have been dying. We spoke, people have been injured, and it's really unfortunate, and it's overwhelmingly the fault of the Ukrainian armed forces, and to me that's because literal fascist organizations have been incorporated into the regular military force of Ukraine. Azov Battalion, I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but that used to be a militia. It's not a militia anymore. It's part of the National Guard of the Ukrainian military. And in 2018 or 2020, I can't remember the exact year, but several years ago, the United States, came under a lot of flack because they were giving money to these neo-Nazi military organizations. So the United States actually passed a law banning the arming and giving of money to armed neo-fascist organizations in Ukraine. But coincidentally enough, it was at the same time that almost all of these armed neo-Nazi organizations were integrated into the regular armed forces of Ukraine, which receives tons of money and weapons from the United States. So they were able to cover their tracks through a loophole, basically. And Azov is just the biggest example, but there's many other militias that became part of the regular armed forces of Ukraine that are neo-Nazis, like in the very literal sense of the word. And so that's really unfortunate. That's something we saw with our own eyes when we were there. I was even able to actually interview a woman who was a veteran of the Second World War. She was a partisan, and she talks a bit about her how she was orphaned. Actually, the Nazis came into her village and killed her entire family, and that's actually what made her into a partisan. And she talks a bit about her story about that and everything, and about how she's really upset to see these Nazis in West Ukraine today. We got a lot of cool footage done, and we really hope that this documentary, Jeff Monson and I really hope that this documentary is going to show people in the West specifically what's going on right now in Donbass, because the conflict has almost been entirely forgotten, I would say, in most of the world, except for Russia and Donetsk and Ukraine, except for Russia, Donbass, and Ukraine. And that's really bad, because the US government is giving the Ukrainians tons of money and weapons, and they're fighting a war of attrition against civilian populations. They're committing war crimes. And we really hope that this documentary film can show people that. We talk directly with people, not like we talk directly with people who live on the front line and live this life every day. We even talked to tons of politicians, and who, at first I was like, I don't want to talk to politicians. I want to talk to the people who are actually, involved in this. The politics doesn't really interest us as much. But then they were like, well, you got to talk to the politicians, because the politicians are literally like some of those people. We talked to the mayor of Stakhanov, who, he's a politician, but he has lived this experience since the beginning, and he was actually elected during 2014 because of his aid efforts to people who were suffering the most under these bombings. A lot of these politicians in the People's Republics have risked life and limb for the populations that elected them. It's not really the same as like kind of the bureaucratic politics we know of in the West. And basically the last thing I'm going to say about Ukraine at this point, I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end, is that Ukraine right now is really trying to start up a full-out war right now. I'm sure, the vast majority of you are living in the United States. I'm sure you've been seeing on the television about how Russia's trying to start a war. They want to invade Ukraine and everything. But Russia's not. The only party that stands to benefit from this conflict escalating into something enormous is Ukraine, because Ukraine cannot take the People's Republics on its own. The People's Republics have entirely voluntary military forces. Their militaries are made up of people who have taken up arms to defend their homes. In the Ukraine, they don't have that. They have conscription. The people fighting these people who are super motivated to defend their homes, the people fighting them are conscripts who don't want to fight their own countrymen, who are forced to be there. And a lot of times that translates into them, abandoning equipment, abandoning their weapons, which is actually in large part how the People's Republics were able to get so much military tech and tanks and jeeps, because the conscripts would come and abandon their equipment. They have no will to fight. And that's why Ukraine, which is supposed to have this modern military, even with the help of US supplied weapons, they're not able to take over the People's Republics. And of course, they say it's because the Russian military is there. The Russian military is occupying the place, but that's just not true. I saw it with my own eyes. And but they're pushing this narrative that Russia is like super aggressive and is trying to start a war in Ukraine, even though it's not beneficial to Russia at all. Russia has nothing to gain from annexing Donetsk and Lugansk or invading it, other than helping the people defend themselves against fascism. But that's not enough for Russia. Russia's a huge power, and what do they stand to lose if they do that? Super heavy sanctions. And Donbass doesn't have that much economically to contribute to Russia. They would have to contribute to the reconstruction of the place. It's not economically in Russia's interest to annex that place or to cause trouble around it. The only people who are causing trouble are the Ukrainians, because they want to reignite this conflict and make it look like Russia started it, because that's the only way they can get NATO, European Union, American military support to win this conflict. And they're really doing a lot I don't know exactly why now, but as of November of this year, they've been trying very hard. They keep saying that Russia, is that the European Union needs to prepare for war with Russia, that Russia is on the brink of invading. There was even a story that I covered at RT just recently, like I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. 3 agents of the Ukrainian security services were detained by Russia's FSB, the Federal Security Service of Russia. They were planning to carry out terrorist attacks in Crimea. One of them, they wanted to blow up a radio tower, a television tower, and an electrical station. And they all, they were all revealed to be agents of the Ukrainian government. And to me, this was likely a move to antagonize Moscow, into taking, to antagonize Moscow into reacting in a way that will make NATO, the European Union, and the United States say, oh, Russia's being aggressive. We are justified in helping Ukraine militarily, and this is like kind of the game that's been playing. This is also kind of the same thing that Ukraine's doing in the conflict, where they're like antagonizing the people's republics for not only through this war of attrition, but also antagonizing them into retaliation, because sometimes the people's republics do retaliate against Ukrainian military positions that are firing artillery at them. But when they do that, then the Ukrainian government says that they're responsible for breaking the ceasefire just as much as they are. But I guarantee almost never the People's Republics are the first ones just aimlessly firing on the Ukrainians. And, what is the evidence for that? The fact that the vast majority of civilian casualties are on the side of Donbass. And I have the statistic right here that actually, I think I might be able to share my screen. It's all in Russian, so it's not really, it wouldn't be really helpful to show, but I can read these statistics for you. It was provided to me by the Lugansk People's Republic, but these statistics are actually collected by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. So it's an organization that actually has a pro-Ukrainian bias, and still they admit like the amount of in 2017, 2018, and 2019. The amount of dead and injured civilians on the Donbass side at every point was at least double that of what was on the Ukrainian side. And at times significantly more. At times the deaths are even triple as much. So this is really the telling figure, I think, that Ukraine is waging a war of attrition, and it's not like a double-sided thing, and I'll finish with something that a conclusion that one of the people that I interviewed told me, who lives by the front line. I was like, okay, well, it's war, right? A lot of people, when they hear about the Ukrainian people firing upon you, they're going to think like, well, you guys probably shoot back too, right? And these people were like, no, we actually don't have any, there's no reason for us to fire on civilians' positions over there, because actually they're our countrymen. The Ukrainian military is actually militarily occupying the territory where they are, because they're still they're on like the border of Lugansk and Donetsk, and the people living on the other side, they also voted for independence. They're living under military occupation. They were just unlucky enough to live close enough to the Ukrainian line where they were invaded. So, so that's all I have to say for the presentation. I hope you guys took notes, have questions. I'd be happy to answer them after. As I understand, we're going to have a break. Yeah.
Thank you, Don, for a tremendously informative and valuable presentation. What we're going to do now is just take a quick break for announcements and fundraising. When we come back, we'll take questions from participants. If you have questions, what I'd like you to do, or what we'd like you to do, is to click on the reactions button and raise your hand on the participants window, and we will try to call on people in the order in which the hands are raised, although they're going up quickly, and I'm trying to follow what's going on. What a terrific presentation. Let me just start off by making a few quick announcements. Our next program next weekend is December 19th, Sunday, and we're having a session looking back at 2021, an open discussion. It's been a hell of a year with January 6th, the attack on Roe v. Wade, gun violence, dysfunctional Congress, global warming, the threat of nuclear apocalypse, pandemic, you name it. We're going to have an open discussion on what happened in 2021 and how to prepare for 2022. In doing this, we're asking some of our members to start a conversation with brief presentations. Anyone who wants to volunteer to prepare a brief, approximately 5-minute presentation, please email Gene, and his email is in the announcement and will also be up on the website by midnight this Friday, so we can plan accordingly. On January 2nd, we're going to have a group discussion on planning for 2022. So with that, I'd just like to quickly turn it over to Richard, who will make a quick fundraising announcement, and then we'll start with the Q&A. If you have a question, click on the reactions button and raise your hand. So Richard, if you just take it real quickly.
Thank you. Yes, most of you have heard this before. We are part of the ecology of the Marxist Library in Oakland, and as part of our work, we raised some money for the library and for our own small budget. I posted on the chat some information of how you can contribute. We have a number of people who now contribute on a regular basis through bill pay in their bank. So it's an automatic thing. They instructed their bank to send us a check every month, and they forget about it. And I think that's a very good way. But there are other ways to contribute directly through PayPal or through Patreon. You can contribute. So I urge you to do that. Please look in the chat. If you don't get to look at the chat, it's in your announcement, email announcement of this meeting, and it's also on the website, ICSSmarks.org. There's a contribute button there. So many ways to contribute. We take dollars in various forms right now, but guess we'll eventually take rubles or Bitcoin or something, but we're not quite at that stage yet. But thank you anyway. On to you, Alan.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, I didn't actually see the order in which people raise their hands, so I'd like to just start. I'll go down the list. Again, I want to encourage people. This is a great opportunity for you to raise your questions. We ask people to limit your questions or comments to about 2 minutes each, and then we will go over individually on each of the questions to Don to respond. So we pretty much take one question at a time to keep it interactive. And I'm going to start off with Raj, who's at the top of the list here. If you would ask your question and give a chance to Don to respond. Raj, take it.
Okay, Mark was ahead of me, but if you're giving me...
That's okay.
Okay.
I didn't see anything.
Thanks. First of all, thank you for a very informative presentation, Don. I would like to, and I think some others would like to get access to you. So if you don't mind, put your email address in the comment, in the chat. So
Yeah,
that would be good. Now, I have a question about Putin. Now, Putin is a complex figure, a very effective leader, seems to me. But at the same time, it seems some of his economic policies are not of the left. he's building monopoly capital in Russia. The taxation is a flat tax. I don't know how to place Putin. I have mixed feelings about Putin. How do you see Putin? That's what I like to know.
Well, thanks for that question. Actually, that is a really great question. And right now, I'm just gonna, before I answer, I'm gonna put in the chat an article I wrote about it, because it is a really interesting topic. I basically have come to the conclusion that Putin's government is can be classified as a Bonapartist one. If you've all read the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, Marx talks about Louis Bonaparte, who came to power after the leaders of the Restoration that came after the French Revolution. And Putin is kind of a parallel to this. He's almost like the socialist. He's almost like the version of that came after the USSR, you know, because the USSR fell, then there was the Restoration under Yeltsin, and then there was this kind of military figure, just like Louis Bonaparte, that was able to, organize a sort of cast of strongmen around him and take control of the government. And what I think is the characteristic form of this government is that usually in capitalism, you have the capitalist class, the monopolists, and they control the capitalist state through bourgeois democracy, right? But this situation is actually the reverse of it more. It's actually a capitalist state in which the oligarchs are and the monopolists are able to make money and conduct their profit-making enterprises, but they're actually subdued to the state. It's actually the state that controls what they can and can't do, and that is really what it's like in Russia, I would say. And the historic event that basically cemented that was in the early 2000s when Vladimir Putin came to power, and he basically talked to the oligarchs. He was like, "Look, this, get with the program or get out." And that's when a lot of oligarchs that were mainly connected to foreign capital were dethroned, basically, and the more national oriented oligarchs that were like, yeah, okay, I'll keep my business to spheres that help the Russian state. I'll keep it to that. They were allowed to stay and make money. So I would say, yeah, Russia's like a sort of state capitalist Bonapartist government. And what you were saying about Putin's right-wing policies, yeah, I mean, to be honest, that's something that I don't like. I don't like that it seems like Putin's administration is trying to deregulate things, but he understands that he can't, in a lot of ways, because of the fact that the Communist Party is so powerful, and people remember the Soviet Union. There's a huge amount of support for the memory of the Soviet Union in Russia, and there's still a lot of things that people enjoy here from the USSR, like the healthcare system, the education system. They're not what they were, but they're a lot better than if they were completely privatized. And so, yeah, so that's basically the situation. It's kind of a halfway house. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Don, is that article, is there a link to it on your website?
Yeah,
Maybe,
oops, I directly
your
messaged
website.
you
I
guys.
forgot to mention it. If you would just give the URL for your website, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so all right, I just sent the article about Bonapartism to everyone in the chat, and that's on my website. So I'll also send the regular full website, so everyone can check it out. So yeah, if you want to read about Bonapartism, the link is now available to everyone.
Great. Next up, I'm going to go to Mark since I jumped the line on him. Mark, if you would 2 minutes, followed by Jean, and then Norma. And go ahead, Mark.
Thank you very much, Alan. Donald, that was a good presentation. But I do have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
How does the Chinese Communist Party see the current Russian Communist Party?
That's a good question. Well, they basically have joint events and stuff, just like with the KPRF and the Korean Workers' Party. Actually, they're on friendly terms, definitely. But the Chinese Communist Party, I think, is mostly taking a practical approach to the Russian government. They kind of when I was in the United States, I really thought that because they were in the same, pretty similar positions, being attacked by U.S. imperialism, that they would work together a bit more. But really, they don't. they are now. Like, actually, I just did a report at RT about how the defense ministers of Russia and China are actually meeting a lot more now, because the mutual threat of the United States is growing significantly, specifically in the South China Sea and in Eastern Europe. Actually, the United States is moving a huge amount of nuclear-capable bombers to the border with Russia at an unprecedented level. So talks between Russia and China right now, in terms of greater mutual security cooperation, are growing. But generally, they haven't cooperated that much in the past, aside from isolated economic agreements and stuff. And the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, I would say their economic approach probably is more in line to what China's achieved than to what they had in their Soviet past, actually.
Well, they both dominate the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Okay, next up, I'm going to call on Norma, followed by Jean, and we'll keep going down the list. So Norma, 2 minutes, make your question or comment.
All right. Hi, that was a really lovely presentation. We all felt wonderful while you were telling us these things.
Thanks.
To think about that, I'd like to know what towns you grew up in, if you don't mind. You mentioned that wonderful background that puts you in the place where you are doing that kind of thinking. I have similar. I grew up in Chicago, but my folks were from Eastern Europe. The other part of that question is, I've asked you if we could talk about, or you could have something to say about, that there was an election, in 2014 maybe, to vote. The eastern area of Ukraine voted to join with the Soviet Union, with Russia, if you want to talk about that, because there was a vote and these people voted for joining, and it's been dismissed altogether. I know that people supposedly can't vote to have part of their national arrangement segregated from, that doesn't happen in the imperialist world.
Yeah, definitely. I'd be happy to answer both of those questions. In terms of where I grew up, I grew up in East Brunswick, New Jersey. It's like in the center of New Jersey. But I also, I sometimes tell people I'm also from New York, because half of my family lived in the Bronx, and I spent a lot of my childhood there as well. My dad is Italian American, and my mom is Puerto Rican American. So my mom's side of the family still lives in the Bronx, and my dad's side in North Jersey. So I spent my time between those places, really. In terms of the elections, this is actually an interesting point that I'm also going to be including in the documentary, that all these people's republics had referendums, and in the Ukrainian constitution, it's legal to separate from Ukraine if there's a referendum that represents the popular will of the masses. And during the events of 2014, they had referendums in, obviously, Crimea. That's the most popular one, but that's the most well-known one. But they also had referendums in Lugansk, in Donetsk, and even Kharkov, and even Odessa. And actually, the Odessa and Kharkov People's Republics were also declared, but they were crushed by the security services of Ukraine. And Odessa didn't even actually have a referendum to leave or become part of Russia. The Odessa's People's Republic, the referendum was to become like an autonomous region of Ukraine. Like Russia has regions that are autonomous, like the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, or there's a number of other autonomous regions that are part of Russia, but they have a degree of serious autonomy. That's what Odessa specifically wanted in Ukraine, but they were crushed anyway. Kharkov had a referendum just for independence. Donetsk and Lugansk had referendums to become independent people's republics, but Crimea had a referendum to be part of Russia, actually. And that was actually Donetsk and Lugansk for a little while. Their policy was not actually integration with Russia, but independence from Ukraine simply. But now their policy is integration with Russia. The Lugansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic are now pursuing policies attempting to integrate with Russia, which is the most interesting thing, because Ukraine says they're occupied by Russia, right? They say that they're being, these places are being forcibly occupied by Russia. But if you go there, you realize there is no Russian military there. They're not part of Russia, but a lot of people want to be part of Russia. But Russia's not doing that, because again, like I spoke about before, it would be very economically difficult for Russia to actually do that, and politically.
That's lovely. The Putin commented some time ago that the most terrible thing that ever happened was the falling apart of the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
It was quoted in the American press in my local newspaper.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did say that. But it's interesting to note that, and this is something I noticed in Russia as well. When we as Americans think about the Soviet Union, we think of communism. When Russians think of the Soviet Union, they don't always think about communism. That's the interesting thing. I mean, a lot of them do. Of course, they think about the Communist Party and everything, but a lot of them think of it like nationalistically. They think of the Soviet Union in terms of its landmass, and so my understanding of what Putin meant was, he didn't have any sympathy for communism, but the fact that the economy of all these places was unified, and the mutual defense was unified and everything. I mean, I think if Putin had his way, the Soviet Union would have just dropped communism and become a sort of capitalist Soviet Union. So,
thank you, Don. We can confirm that you haven't lost your American accent. And except for maybe your New Jersey accent, we don't detect much of that. But in any case, it's your American English is doing fine.
Thanks.
Next up is Gene, followed by 338-2841. Gene, if you would ask your question, 2 minutes, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. And again, I agree. This is a tremendous, great presentation, and it's really educational for, I think, all of us. I have two kind of questions. One is that at an earlier discussion several years ago, we had a speaker who said that the difference between East and West Ukraine goes way back in history. During World War II, Western Ukraine was actually occupied by the Nazis. And before that, with the formation during the Civil War, I think the Poles had an empire going there. So I don't know very much. I remember some of what he said, but I don't remember the details. So if you could confirm that, that would be great. And the other thing is, these weird ideas that are put forth in the name of realpolitik on the part of the imperialists. And it's said that, well, Xi Jinping and the Chinese communists are just waiting for Putin to make his move so that then they can attack Taiwan. And that's just totally bogus. Yeah. But it is true that the Chinese and Russian militaries have been cooperating in military naval activities, and they actually sailed. They sent Russian and Chinese fleet through the straits between Hokkaido and Honshu, which are two major islands. But there's a little strip there that, although it would normally be um, Japanese national waters, territorial waters, they made it an international waterway so that U.S. nuclear armed ships could go through, which would be otherwise banned in the Japanese constitution. So anyway, those two things. One is the history of this, and the other is, this totally bogus idea that Xi Jinping and the Chinese are just waiting, for the United States to be distracted so that they can take Taiwan. It's just a totally, it's like another planet. Anyway.
Yeah.
Care to comment on?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about both of those very interesting subjects. And I also want to say thank you to all of you for enjoying the presentation. It makes me very happy that, I put a lot of work into this and you all really enjoyed it. In terms of the China-Russia thing, yeah, I mean, I have to agree with you. I think like the Washington projects its own imperialist ambitions on other countries all the time. And, I spoke a lot about Putin, the current Putin government, how they're capitalist and everything. But it is also important to note that this government is sort of like, there's two sides of the coin. On the other hand, Russia is put in the position in which I consider, I think it serves an anti-imperialist function because it's one of the main targets of U.S. imperialism, and the United States government wants to get Russia's markets, and they want to make it so that Gazprom doesn't compete with American energy corporations and all this. And the only way they can do this is by stifling Russia. So by Russia asserting itself, it is counterbalance to U.S. imperialism, and in that way, I think it's a good thing. But it doesn't have any imperial ambitions like Washington accuses it of, just like China, In terms of the history that you mentioned there, yeah, I could talk for a long time about that because, and one of the things that's going to be in this documentary film is the fact that this war that's going on right now in Ukraine, people don't consider it in isolation. People consider it a continuation of their historic struggle against fascism. Like when the Nazis invaded Ukraine, there were basically no neutral parties, virtually none. Almost everyone took a side, and when the Nazis came, they either helped them or they ran into the forest and became partisans. There was almost no in between. And in the Western Ukraine, in the west of Ukraine, like they were the overwhelming majority of people, I would say, were collaborators. And in the eastern part, the overwhelming majority were pro-Soviet. And actually, Western Ukraine, the current neo-fascists that are in Western Ukraine, they all idolize Stepan Bandera, who was a collaborator with the Nazis in Ukraine when the Nazis invaded. He had his own organization called the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, and when the Nazis invaded, they actually put him in a concentration camp because Stepan Bandera declared an independent Ukraine, and the Nazis were like, this isn't in our agenda. So they sent him to a concentration camp and then told him, you're going to stay in this camp, but if you want to continue leading your anti-communist insurgency, go ahead. But you'll do it from the concentration camp. And he agreed. These are the people that the people in West Ukraine support, and the people in East Ukraine, their entire legacy is pro-Soviet partisan resistance to Nazism. We're talking about the regions of the Soviet coal miners. The Soviet coal miners were like they were the most supportive of the Soviet socialist state. And during the times of Stalin, like Stakhanov, the guy to start the Stakhanovist movement in the Soviet Union, it was from Donbass. He was from Donetsk, and this region was the most supportive of Stalin throughout the USSR period. And during the war, they were super supportive of the USSR. They were super anti-fascist, and all of the museums, and this is also going to be in the documentary film, the museums in Lugansk and Donetsk, all of them that focus on the Great Patriotic War also have a section on the current conflict, because for them they're connected 100%. You can't have one without the other. They feel the current people who are in Donetsk and Lugansk fighting Ukrainian Nazis feel like they're continuing the legacy of their forefathers. When in the West, they say that they were occupied by the USSR, and they don't consider Soviet history their legacy. They even they call the media in Ukraine regularly calls Donbass a cesspool of Soviet supporters. It's that history was pivotal in this conflict, and it even goes as far back as to the Cossacks, I think, also. Ukraine was the land of the Cossacks, basically, and there came a time where some were like, we want to not be part of the Russian Empire, and others that were in favor of the Russian Empire, and that actually began this sort of division, the very early division. But what really cemented it was fascism and communism. And also with Poland, this did also play a part, because we also have to remember that, we could talk about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Everyone says that the USSR took a part out of Poland, but that's not true. Actually, Poland took a part of that of the USSR, and Ukraine and Belarus. And this territory that the USSR got back in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is actually not even part of Poland anymore, because of what didn't belong to them. It was imperialized. It was taken over by interwar Poland. And this is another part of this World War II narrative that I think we're lied to about by Western historians when they try to make Poland out to be like this victim country in World War II. Poland was like a country that had this similar aspirations to Nazi Germany. They wanted more land. They wanted to recreate the Polish Empire. They were complicit in the Munich Agreement. They were looking to make deals with Nazi Germany against the USSR. The only thing is that they were politically outmaneuvered, and that's why they got the short end of the stick in World War II. But that's all I have to say about that.
Okay,
Thank
next
you so much.
338-2841, followed by Richard F., Richard W., and Youssef. If those of you who have questions, click on the reactions button, raise your hand. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Kit. Don, I really appreciate your report and update. It's so rare now to hear what's going on over there. I used to watch RT until the U.S. banned it. I work around a lot of people, people that I notice are Russian who work for the local government here, and a lot of them are in the tech industry. And I've also run into Russians in the real estate, but seems to be a hesitancy for them to talk about politics. I don't get a sense of where they are on things. I'm just curious, how can we get more reliable, regular news about Russia besides your report? And then how can, would you be able to come to the U.S., or would you be blocked or arrested here for visiting? And I'm also curious about what's the COVID situation is in Russia, the vaccination program, and what do the people on the streets think of Trump and what's going on here? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, what was your first question? I started thinking a lot about the COVID stuff.
How are there ways for us to get more reliable, regular news, since RT's been banned.
Right.
And yeah, the COVID situation, the vaccination program, and what do people on the streets think about what's going on here in the U.S. about Trump?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I know that RT has had some trouble in the United States, but you can always actually watch its television program on the internet on its website, rt.com. You can get RT International, RT America, or any stuff like that. And that's all in English. But I got to be honest with you, there's very few news outlets that will give you an idea of what is going on in Russia in English. I would say maybe like the Moscow Times, but again, a lot of these news outlets are also like completely biased. They have a complete liberal anti-Soviet bias, and that's what's a shame, I think. And pretty much all the pro-Soviet stuff or communist stuff is all exclusively in Russian, which is why I'm trying to get this Revolution Report project off the ground. And I mean, ideally, I'd like to do it full time and be able to support myself, but there's not enough money in it yet to do that. But what's the COVID situation here? Okay, the COVID situation was like not that bad at the beginning of the pandemic because the government locked down very quickly, and the first wave was cut very quickly. But then the government started to understand that lockdowns were economically very difficult, and they decided to take the risk. And the COVID has actually spread pretty bad throughout Russia. I got sick with it in the second wave, and I've since it was a long time ago. It was like already a year ago, so I've been vaccinated with Sputnik at this point. But vaccination is very low. People, for some reason, don't trust the vaccination. It's like the vaccination rate is like 35%. Even though Sputnik is like one of the vaccines with with some of the fewest bad side effects. There's no one talking about people getting heart attacks or blood clots from Sputnik. This was never a consequence of the vaccine. But still, I think Russians just generally they just have a general distrust of their government. And I don't think it even has to do with Putin or whoever specifically is in power. It's just the mindset. People don't really trust authorities here. It's kind of, maybe it's just in Moscow. It's fashionable to be opposition, even though they don't understand what the opposition is for. In terms of what do people on the streets think about what again?
Oh, hi. Sorry. What do people think about Trump and the situation here in the U.S. With the fascists here?
Right.
Also, I forgot to ask if you came back to the U.S., would you be blocked or arrested from visiting?
Right.
Or scrutinized by the federal government, FBI, whatever.
Yeah, I've come back several times to visit actually, and what I realized is actually I have an easier time coming back now than I used to, and I was like confused. I was like, "What? I'm not even asked any questions at the airport." And I asked some of my coworkers and everything, like, what could be with that? And a lot of people seem to think that there are agreements between the U.S. and Russian governments that like you don't touch our journalists, we don't touch yours, and most of the time this works. But I mean, at other times when one government, and it's usually the United States, to be honest, I haven't heard of American journalists being arrested in Russia, but when the United States wants to push Russia's buttons, they'll detain or arrest one of our journalists. The last time it happened was just a few months ago. But I haven't had any actual direct problems with the U.S. authorities because of this.
We've been made more and more stupid over the decades.
Actually, the last part of her question was about Trump. Comment on that?
Yeah. I was going to add that people just think Trump's kind of an idiot. I mean, at first they thought that it was going to be good for Russia because he was making some rhetoric about like doing business with Putin and stuff and not being so hostile. But the same kind of stuff, that all of the previous administrations did continued against Russia. And they just view him as some silly guy.
Okay, next up is Richard F., followed by Richard W. Richard F., if you'd ask your question.
Yeah, well, I have two questions. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation. It's really exciting to have your presentation and a presentation from Russia itself. There's not a lot of controversy in the left about Russia in contrast to China. Some people think that China is moving in a progressive direction. Some people think China is moving in a backward direction, whereas in the left, everybody thinks Russia is not so great. I'm one of the people who thinks I disagree. I'm not sure I agree with your Bonapartist view of Russia because, of course, Bonapartist France evolved into imperialist France, and I don't see Russia evolving into an imperialist country. I noticed that the program of the Russian Communist Party seems pretty much the Putin government policy. Food sovereignty, military strength, so on and so forth. So cultural regeneration. Anyway, just a comment. And secondly, I was asked to ask, what is the situation with in Russia about rehabilitation of Stalin? We in ICSS are very friendly with Grover Furr, and I'm wondering whether you know about him or his works are well known in Russia. Thank you.
Well, I actually know Grover Furr personally. When I was at All Marxist-Leninist Union at Rutgers University, we invited him to speak many times, and I like his work very much. And I remember when I was reading his work, I was like, wow, this is like so like against the grain in the United States. But he's actually not saying, I mean, he's not saying anything out of the ordinary if you consider it in the Russian audience. Like his works are basically just, what a lot of the population understands about that period of history, especially people, members of the KPRF. So, I know he's, mainstream academia over in the United States thinks he's a conspiracy theorist, but over here he's just saying pretty normal stuff. So the rehabilitation of Stalin is an interesting subject here because the majority, I would say the majority of initiatives to rehabilitate the image of Stalin actually comes from the grassroots level. And the state has actually tried to come down on it a lot in terms of like saying, you don't have permission to put up that statue there or this and that. It really like the popularity of Stalin is at a grassroots level, like people who have grandparents who remember living in that time and actually look back at it fondly. I mean, every single person I've spoken to who is like a veteran of World War II, and there aren't that many left, but I've spoken to quite a few of them, or not just veterans, but people who just lived under Stalin. They are all the biggest supporters of Stalin, that you've ever met. They're super pro-Stalin, and that's something that in the United States I wouldn't have been able to imagine. But here it's like everyone's like, well, yeah, duh, they lived during the time of Stalin. But that to me is crazy, like just goes to show that people who actually lived under Stalin perceive him positively. But the newer generations, I mean, they're really taken by the works of like Alexander Solzhenitsyn and all this like gulag, anti-Stalin propaganda, blame Stalin for the repressions. This stuff is very influential on the younger generations, especially because they have complete access to liberal media now. So yeah.
Okay, next up is Richard W., followed by Trajan, New York, and Yusef. So Richard, if you would ask your question.
Sure, I got 3 questions. Just to keep somebody jumping. First off, if you'd indulge me, every time you were speaking, Don, I kept looking at your poster, trying to translate your poster, and I think I read "Mother of the Soviets," but I'm not sure what the first word says. Could you? What's it?
It's Rodina Mat Zavyot. Rodina is motherland, but Rodina Mat is motherland, but they sometimes say Rodina for short. And Zavyot is calls. So Rodina Mat Zavyot.
Okay, I got it totally wrong.
No, it's okay. Zavyot and Soviet are almost identical words.
So, I asked a question I said put something in the chat about the Azov battalion, brigade, whatever they're called. Like, I can't remember. And so I was wondering if you had any information about the U.S. sending mercenaries or sending foreign insurgents for training under with the Azov battalion or brigade, whatever it's called these days.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the second question I had is, you've mentioned, or China has, Russian China has been mentioned. What hasn't been mentioned is the third leg of this tripod, actually, which is now Iran. And I was wondering if you had any opinions on the Russian-Iran linkage. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'd be happy to answer those questions. I don't know about the U.S. sending mercenaries to Ukraine to train the Azov battalion, but the Azov battalion has definitely been trained by U.S. military advisors at several points after the events of 2014, and also there are like there's this article that I just found that I remember it's from several years ago. Ukraine's neo-Nazis believed to have trained U.S. white supremacists. This is according to the FBI. So there is a linkage between the Azov battalion and white supremacist militias in the United States. And I'm going to post that article right now. You can read it when you have some free time. I just posted in the chat. So there is some connection there. And as for Iran, this is also a good point. Iran and Russia cooperate mostly in terms of, I would think diplomatically and also militarily, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure about how much economically they cooperate. To be honest, I don't know that much about Russia-Iran cooperation, but I do know about a lot about Iran's history, because I did a video for it on my YouTube channel, and it's fascinating to me. It's like a socialist country. They have a planned economy, and they're not run by a communist party, and they like officially are against communism as an atheistic ideology, but they have the Islamic Republican Guards Corps, which basically serves the same function as the Communist Party did in the USSR, which is very interesting. So, but yeah,
if I could real quick,
yeah,
if it hadn't been for the U.S. In collaboration with the Shah of Iran using the Savak to kill off the Communist Party in Iran, it could very well have been a communist Iran instead of what it is now, the theological Iran.
Yeah. There were a lot of communists in Iran. Yeah, Mossadegh was super sympathetic.
Okay, next up is Trajan from New York. If you would unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
I've been to Soviet Union when it was under the socialist government back in the 80s, but I was there recently visiting relatives. But I always tell people here in the U.S., geez, some of the apartments of my relatives are nicer apartments than I have here in Buffalo. And their eyes spin because I want to point out to them that everything is negative, like the media points out. Also, I want to point out too, I mentioned before on this program, my mother was taken to slave labor by the Nazis from Kremenchuk, or actually from Ustamovka, which is like 15 kilometers from Kremenchuk. And she always, when I grew up, I always heard about the war crimes because of the concentration camps she went to, but she always had it out for the Western Ukrainians. And she always, this sticks in my mind, she always says the Ukrainian camp guards were meaner than the Germans.
Yeah.
So, and then also she rant and raved about the Catholic Western Ukrainians. This is something you don't hear about, and it's still going on, I understand. There's a lot of hostility between the Orthodox Ukrainians and the Western Ukrainians, which is predominantly Catholic. And most of those Catholics side with the Nazis. And another thing, I just got a letter from a relative in Kharkov, and I've stayed with her in her apartment. She had a nice, really nice apartment. And she's really been upset throughout this war. And the recent letter, like I got about a month ago, was the government, Ukrainian government's deducting money for the war from her meager pension. She's a retired librarian, and she's been against this war. And I also want to stress too, I've been critical on Twitter about the Ukrainian war, and I got blocked trying to communicate with them by the Ukrainian email service, but I've been able to get through Yahoo. So, but they blocked my Earthlink account, so I can't. They never gave a reason because Earthlink investigated it because I was critical about the war. So they look at the Twitter. And another thing I want to ask you about, I think the U.S. is trying to stop the Nord Stream 2 by provoking this confrontation this November. As we know, they've been trying to block it all along. And this is a perfect example. If Russia goes in, the Nord Stream 2 is going to be canceled. Even the Financial Times last week had an article about that it's going to be blocked. So that's all I want to say.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment about the apartments that you were talking about, because here in Russia, I mean, I also noticed the difference. I mean, living in the US and living here. In Russia, the highest quality apartments that you can get here are actually apartments that were built during the time of Stalin. They're called Stalinki, and they were like made of they're made like of such high quality, like solid steel. The buildings were made of. The walls are super thick, so you can't hear the neighbors. The ceilings are super high, and actually, like these are coveted apartments now, even though they were built in like the 1940s, 1950s, and even other apartments, like specifically ones built during the times of Brezhnev. Those are also high quality apartments that people, are still they're still coveted, these types of apartments. And the newer buildings are actually considered, to be made of lower quality materials. So people are actually often trying to get the older apartments. It's interesting because we're always taught that everything sucked in the USSR, and it's just not true. And it's like decades later, people are still trying to get these apartments. About Nord Stream 2, I would have to agree with you. I mean, that's another thing that Ukraine and the West would stand to gain from the outbreak of another conflict, especially because, contradictorily enough, the Ukraine makes big money off of Russia sending its gas through Ukraine, and that's where Russia has had to send its gas through until the completion of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The Ukrainian, they have an agreement with the Ukrainian government that Ukraine gets huge tolls, and Russia sends gas through Ukraine as one of the ways they send gas to Europe. So yeah, that's the contradictory end of it.
Okay, next up is Youssef, followed by Mark, and then I think we're going to wrap it up. So Yusuf, if you would ask your question.
Yes, my sort of unresearched, unsubstantiated impression is that Putin represents the bourgeoisie, sort of like a national bourgeoisie that's not so tied to imperialism and wants to look after its own interests. I wonder if you have any comments on that. Also, my impression is that Eastern Ukraine is more proletarian, and that's why it's more progressive. Third, and let me make a comment that I think that more solidarity work with the Donbass region needs to be done here. Thirdly, do you have any comments about Russia's relations with other former Soviet republics?
Yeah, about the national bourgeoisie. Yeah, I would have to agree with you as well, because when Putin, came to power, like I mentioned before, there was a definitive moment where I think the government became Bonapartist, and part of that happening was Putin basically kicking the oligarchs that were making money and had foreign nationality, foreign citizenships, and were making money off of selling the country's capital abroad. He basically kicked those oligarchs out. That's why Putin's credited with ending the 1990s, the privatization crisis of the 1990s, because I mean he didn't solve it by reverting back to socialism, but he put the oligarchs who were responsible, who were like the comprador bourgeoisie, he put them out of business, and got the nationalist bourgeoisie on his side as a result, because it was also profitable for them. They were able to fill the market shares that the comprador bourgeoisie held, and so they came to an agreement. In terms of Donbass, yeah, they're also like more proletarian, because like I was talking about before, they're the center of coal mining in the country, which is basically the major export throughout the Soviet period of Ukraine. And they obviously, grain was the other one, grain and coal, but coal was the major export of the eastern part. Now in the West, I'm not sure exactly what their major exports are, but I would assume they're a bit more agricultural, because there's not that much agriculture in Lugansk and Donetsk.
Okay, last question will be from Mark. If you would ask your question, then Don, I'd like you to just do a short sum up or any final comments. That would be great. So Mark,
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. Thank you, Alan. Donald, Mark Albertson again. One point, and then you can dwell on it if you want for a little bit. Back after the collapse of the Soviet Union, George Kennan reminded the United States government not to spread NATO into Eastern Europe, that it would incite the Russians. You have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's I think it was just good advice, because that's exactly what's happened. I mean, like they want to spread NATO into Ukraine, and that is something that Russia will not permit. That's something that Russia may go to war over,
Right, I have the same feeling here, right?
Yeah, they're not gonna, I mean, like Sergei Lavrov has already said, like that is basically where the line is drawn. Like if Ukraine goes to invade Lugansk and Donetsk, the Russian military will go to defend them, because they don't consider Lugansk and Donetsk part of Russia, but they consider the majority of the population Russians, and
right.
they consider it their responsibility to protect them. And I mean, Russia has moved its military towards its eastern border. I mean, like it's preparing for trouble, but it's not instigating this conflict, So yeah, that seems like a pretty good estimate of what's going on. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, like it sucks that they're NATO countries, but those nations are not as close to the Russian people as Ukraine is.
Right.
And so that's an entirely different ballgame.
Actually, Kennan's aversion to this goes back to the late 40s when NATO was being formed. He was not a fan of this.
Mm-hmm.
And he also
Yeah.
warned Truman, don't cross the 38th parallel once you've evicted the North Koreans from South Korea. Don't listen to MacArthur or the Joint Chiefs. Then he warned Kennedy in 61, don't go into South Vietnam. And then when he was 99 years old, he told George Bush, don't go into Iraq.
Yeah.
So here's
That's
a guy who
interesting.
goes at bat 4 times and gets 4 hits.
Yeah. But I mean, that's true, because the rhetoric of the United States throughout the Cold War, right, was like containment, and NATO was marketed as a mutual defense pact. But now its true nature is revealed. I mean, after the fall of the USSR, it was supposed, if it was really a mutual defense pact, it would have had no purpose anymore. Instead, it showed its true colors as an imperialist military alliance. Is it like, what are they defending, like, at this point? They're all on Russia's border. It's like absurd. Like, it would be unimaginable if Russia was like had 9 military bases in Mexico and nuclear weapons in Cuba, like in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they were constantly threatening the United States. This is an unbelievable situation for Americans.
Well, I actually do research at a military magazine. And so when you compare the United States to the Soviet Union, we've got over 800 military bases and Russia has 7.
Yeah. There's a meme that a lot of people are familiar with that pokes fun at that reality, like that Russia put its country too close to our military bases.
Okay, Don, if
you.
you have any final comments, we can wrap this up.
Yeah, well, I just want to again say thank you all so much for this invitation. I got to admit, I didn't know about this Marxist library until Alan reached out to me, but it seems like a fantastic forum, and I would definitely like to come back in the future to participate in everything. And I put my email in the chat. I'm always willing to cooperate. I mean, I feel like one of the major goals of my life is to contribute to the anti-capitalist struggle, and I'm trying to do that in the best possible way here in Moscow, translating information that hasn't yet been translated into English so that it can be available to comrades like all of you, and hopefully someday to show the vast majority of people in the West the reality of what's going on, the reality of what people really think about their socialist past. I really think, a lot of Western Marxists argue about, like, oh, was the USSR really socialist or not? Or like, should we consider that socialism? I'm of the opinion that, like, it was undoubtedly socialism, and it obviously made mistakes, but if we're going to go forward, we have to understand the Soviet experience and the experience of the Eastern European socialist countries. And we have to take what they did right, and they did a lot right, and we have to understand what they did wrong. And that's mainly around the perestroika era. But I'd love to continue having conversations with all of you and continue collaborating in solidarity. So thanks a lot for finding my presentation interesting and inviting me here.
Well, thank you, Don. This has been just a tremendously informative presentation, and we definitely are going to invite you to come back. I also want to thank the participants. I thought the quality of the questions were just really outstanding this week, and the discussion period was really informative. So it's very hopeful to see somebody like you out there involved with these issues and trying to get the truth out. And we want to encourage you and support you in your work. Just a quick reminder to everybody, next week we will have our presentation looking back at 2021. You can go to the ICSS marx.org website and get more information. Sign up for our mailing list on the website. There's a pop-up form, and you'll be notified by email for upcoming presentations. And we look forward to continuing into next year and continuing the good work. So thank you very much. We're going to end the recording now. Thank you, Raj, for hosting. And some of us are going to stick around to chat informally. It won't be recorded. But thank you very much, Don. We really appreciate your coming to our forum and speaking. Thank you.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, at yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.